5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Give me 1 second, Dad. We're trying out some new software here that is still
Wow, you're an
loading.
innovator.
I'm an innovator, man. I'm an innovator. Do people see our picture? That's what I'm wondering. For some reason on my side, it looks dark. Give me 1 second. I think we're live. Yep. Okay. I'm getting that we're live. All right. Let's do this again. We are live. Coming to you live. Look for the live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
There's so much going on. It's such an avalanche. It's, very difficult to sort it all out and explain
Yeah.
exactly what's going on. But, during the campaign, what did Trump say about Project 2025?
He said he didn't know anything about it.
Yeah. And in his first week, he has done everything in his power in very specific ways to implement Project 2025, including appointing one of the architects of Project 2025, Russell Voigt, to one of the most important positions in the government, probably a top five position. You know what that is, Sam?
I forgot now. I did see his clips.
OMB, Office of Management and Budget, that deals with the disbursement of federal funds. This guy is not only an architect of Project 2025, he also is an avowed Christian nationalist. And, a lot of Trump's agenda has been to implement a Christian nationalist imposition upon the country. Uh, Many of his supporters are, openly advocating that. And it's no surprise that the worst groups that are anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi, white supremacist are all loudly cheering the election of Donald Trump. That's not an accident. And of course, we have his biggest donor, biggest supporter, Elon Musk. And what's he been doing in Germany, Sam?
Talking to the ADF, the far right political party in Germany.
Yes, and making jokes about the Holocaust and saying, oh, the Germans, they don't need to have any guilt anymore. We just need to get past it, as if the Holocaust was just an unfortunate incident that really doesn't matter anymore. Not surprisingly, he has been denounced by Holocaust remembrance and groups fighting anti-Semitism. But let's get past that. One of the most pernicious aspects of the executive order, following the playbook of Project 2025, are executive orders that harm people's health and seriously risk their lives. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. This is directly a result of the initiatives that Trump has already put into effect. And this is not the first time that decision making and policies by Donald Trump have cost large numbers of lives. Do you know who Deborah Birx is, Sam?
Yes, she was the head of the COVID task force under Trump, I believe.
Right. Who appointed her?
Donald Trump.
Right. And what did she say? She said that Trump could have saved hundreds of thousands of additional lives during the pandemic if he had acted more forcefully and more effectively. And as we know, he tried to talk his way out of the pandemic. He lied to the American people. He promoted cures. And this is his own appointee, the number one expert on what was going on in the Trump administration during the pandemic, saying he could have saved hundreds of thousands of additional lives. This isn't the first time, that decisions and policies by Donald Trump have threatened people's lives. Let's turn to one of the least known least commented upon orders from Donald Trump that directly uh, threatens the lives of people.
Before
You
you
know
do
it?
that, before you do that, I don't think your microphone is connected. If you could click the little caret next to the audio button. Sorry, folks, hang with us
Okay.
and
What do I do?
make sure that Yeti, the where it says select a microphone, make sure that Yeti is selected.
It is selected.
Okay, I'm wrong then. All right, keep going. Sorry.
So this is a little known, it's kind of, this is the Donald Trump playbook. Throw out so many things that are so outrageous, you can't even keep them up. You run out of outrage when you're dealing with Donald
I
Trump.
know it's been hard to keep track of even what's happening today because he froze federal aid and then Medicaid and Medicare sites went down and then they said that this wasn't affecting individual financial aid and then a judge blocked it and now none of it's frozen and yeah it's hard to even keep track today what's happening.
Yeah, right. This is the strategy. This is something Donald Trump has used throughout his career. You just get fatigue. You just can't follow it all. You know, one act is outrageous as the other, and you run out of outrage when you're dealing with Donald Trump. And that's a typical strategy of leaders with authoritarian bents like Donald Trump. But as I was saying, there was a little noticed, little commented upon Donald Trump initiative that directly threatens people's lives. You know what I'm talking about?
The US aid stuff he's doing.
Yes. Uh, do you remember George W. Bush, Sam? You were alive enough probably to remember him.
I do, yes.
Was he a radical liberal?
No.
No, he was, maybe the most conservative president. Certainly, he and Reagan were the most conservative presidents elected since the 1920s. And maybe Bush was even more conservative than Ronald Reagan.
Right.
But the most acclaimed thing across the board, regardless of ideology, that affects liberals, conservative, moderates, Republicans, Democrats, independents. What was that program, Sam?
I'm not sure.
The AIDS program, the AIDS relief program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, known as PEPFAR, PEPFAR. It was to provide assistance for HIV prevention and treatment to the less developed world with a particular focus on Africa. And according to independent analysts, over time, about a 20-year period, it has saved, you know how many lives?
No.
Not 1 million, not 2 million, not 5 million, not 10 million, 25 million lives that would otherwise have been lost to HIV infection, including 5.5 million children. Out of the blue, with no warning, Donald Trump suspended the PEPFAR program. People could not get their medicines. And you know what happens when people's medicines are interrupted, Sam?
No.
Two things. One, the treatment is undermined, so they're more likely to get infections, more likely to get sick and die, more likely to pass it on to others, more likely for pregnant women to pass it on to their kids. And when you interrupt uh, medical treatment, according to the authorities, not me, I'm not a medical authority, but this is, pretty well established, it promotes resistance strains of the pathogen, which could spread beyond Africa to anywhere in the world. Experts have indicated that if this program is permanently terminated, like they seem to want to do, in Africa alone, it could cost 10 million or more lives over the next decade. 10 million or more lives over the next decade. And if it spreads, across the world, who knows how many additional lives could be lost and how much suffering will take place. Now, everything that comes out of the Trump is so chaotic and so unclear that I think just a few hours ago, Marco Rubio issued a directive saying they could resume uh, direct health programs to foreign nations, which seems to have established the resumption of the PEPFAR program. But as I said, people's medication is already disrupted. It's not at all clear, what aspects of the program are still suspended and what aspects of the program will be continued. Plus, they clearly want to end this program. You know why? Not
No.
because it doesn't work, but because they think it promotes, homosexuality, lesbianism, transgender, all these horrible things that they claim to be against. And for some twisted logic, they also think it promotes abortion. Right. So, like other programs that they're trying to terminate, it clashes with their ideology. This is unbelievably cruel. It directly threatens the lives of so many people, not just in Africa, but potentially across the world. And as I said, other than this twisted ideology, there is absolutely no good reason to suspend one of the most successful programs in the history of the presidency, inaugurated by one of our most conservative presidents, not by some radical liberal. Second way in which they threaten people's health and lives is the suspension of federal grant and aid programs, with the exception, apparently, of aid to individuals and Social Security, uh, Medicare, and food stamps. Now, it is unclear whether it applies to Medicaid. Do you know what the Medicaid program is?
Medicaid, I believe, is for people with disabilities and low income
No,
folks.
that's happening. People who can't
Oh,
afford to pay for their own health care.
okay.
It's life-saving health care, not for a few million, but for tens of millions of Americans. And again, it's unclear, what the situation is coming out of the Trump administration. They've recently said, well, Medicaid is exempt, but the states report that they don't have access to the portals for federal funds. And so, the future of that program is in jeopardy. But there are lots of other ways in which this freeze directly affects people's health and lives. It means we're not going to have, at least in its duration, grants and programs for medical research into life-saving treatments for afflictions like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's or cancer or strokes. That is all being interrupted. And on top of that, they issued an order saying there can't even be any health communications to the American people from federal health agencies. So if you're threatened, you know, in your community by some health emergency, you're not going to know about it. This suspension affects medical care for veterans, including veterans suicide prevention programs. It affects the Meals on Wheels. Do you know what that is, Sam?
Some sort of meal delivery service.
For who?
Low
For
income.
old people who
Oh,
need
old
it and
people.
depend upon it, as
Right.
well as other meal delivery programs. It might affect the student lunch programs, in schools for needy kids who absolutely depend upon it. I can go on, but in so many ways, for no reason, because, he doesn't want anything that to do with climate change or diversity and equity or the Green New Deal, which doesn't even exist. There's no such thing. It was just a proposal that never got passed. He is putting in jeopardy in so many ways the health and lives of the American people. And I believe what he's doing is illegal. that he cannot refuse to spend money appropriated by Congress. Under the Constitution, it's the Congress, not the president, who has the authority to appropriate money, the power of the purse. Who was the previous president who thought he had the power to decide what to spend and what not to spend?
Reagan.
Nope.
Oh,
Or Reagan. Worse.
Nixon.
Nixon was part of the Watergate scandal. This was considered scandalous. This was turning the president into a monarch. And now that discredited doctrine has been revived again in a way that directly threatens the health and safety. Also grants to, we love the police. Well, grants to police for public safety, to fire, responders who directly whose actions save the lives of the American people are also suspended here. I guarantee what will never be suspended would be the special tax breaks, the subsidies, the policies that benefit whom, Sam?
The rich.
The rich. The rich are going to get richer. Donald Trump admitted that in his first term at Mar-a-Lago when he had his rich friends surrounding him. He said, "We're going to make you even richer." All right, next. Pulling out of the World Health Organization. This is part of Trump's phony America First. Well, America benefits from these international arrangements, like NATO, like the Paris Accords, like the World Health Organization. And if we have another pandemic, and there's a fair likelihood we will, pulling out of the World Health Organization is just going to make it more difficult to combat the pandemic because these pandemics are worldwide. They're not limited just to the United States. And, an America First approach, as we saw in the deep failures for Trump to deal with COVID-19, just doesn't work. So, I already mentioned very briefly the suspension of communications of by health organizations, of meetings, of grants, organizations that work on dealing with diseases that threaten our health and our well-being. Next thing I want to talk about is the suspension of the program designed to mitigate the effects of environmental pollution and degradation on poor and minority communities. Do Donald Trump or Elon Musk have to worry about environmental degradation directly affecting them?
No.
Of course not. They can move anywhere they want. They can design their homes to, mitigate the dangers. They can hire private fire, private police, private water service. They can do whatever they want. The wealthy are never affected by this. It's always the marginal, poor people who bear the brunt of environmental degradation and pollution. A prime example is the so-called Cancer Alley in southwest Louisiana, a stretch of about 85 miles, primarily impacting minority communities, Black communities, with a huge number of petrochemical plants there, which directly have impacted the health of the residents of those communities. And now, federal programs to mitigate that are eliminated. The rich aren't affected, but marginal and poor people are directly affected by this. And of course, this isn't a direct effect like some of these others, but we have to mention the elimination of any program to deal with climate change. In fact, they've erased climate change. Climate change and abortion are not words that are going to be used by anyone in the federal government under Trump. And they're going to make it much worse by their program of extractive industries and burning fossil fuels. This is not a projection. This is not an estimate. It's here. You've experienced it, Sam, right? Just the last few weeks.
Yes, here in California with the
Historic
wildfires.
wildfires, historic hurricanes, tornadoes, bomb tornadoes, droughts, floods, rising sea levels, melting glaciers. It's all here, and it threatens people's health and lives, and it's going to be a lot worse uh, under 4 years of Donald Trump. I think, I could go on, but I think I've made the point pretty clearly.
Yeah, you did. Today, when you called me and you said you wanted the title to include this idea of Trump's agenda causing death, I was like, that seems a little bit too strong. But I think you've made a pretty strong case for how crazy this agenda will be and possibly life threatening as well.
And I've been very specific. I haven't engaged in hyperbole or generalizations. I've zeroed in on the specific things that Trump has done and how in detail they affect people's health and people's lives. A couple of other things.
Wait, hold on. I wanted to add something. This was from our one of our from our channel manager, Savannah. She said that Medicaid actually generates a substantial amount of revenue for state governments, and if it's eradicated, it would put the state and federal governments into more of a deficit. Did you know that, Dad?
Absolutely. Maybe I didn't make that crystal clear. Savannah is very smart and she's right on. Medicaid is a joint federal and state program. By opting into Medicaid, and a few red states have refused, greatly to the detriment of the health and lives of the poor people within those states. And we know the red states actually have the most per capita poor people. They're the poorest segment of the country. By opting out, they don't get the federal aid. But if you opt into Medicaid, you get the federal aid. You don't get the federal aid. Either you've got to run deficits, which states' constitutions prohibit you from doing, or you've got to cut back on the program, jeopardizing people's health and lives. That's why this is so critically important, along with all the other programs that are put in jeopardy by this freeze. Now, we know a federal judge, right, has temporarily paused this freeze, just as a federal judge temporarily paused Trump's executive order on so-called birthright citizenship. Basically following the law. Congress sets the priorities. Donald Trump has Republicans in control of both houses of Congress. If he wants to change the direction of federal programs, what constitutionally should he be doing?
I don't know.
Going to Congress and getting Congress to change the appropriations. The power of the purse, under the Constitution is lodged in Congress, not in the presidency. But Donald Trump does not recognize this. One of the important motivations, aside from, you know, uh, taking revenge on liberals and his enemies and implementing his extreme agenda, one of the primary motivations for what Trump is doing is his belief in the unitary executive. He has, again, been absolutely clear on this, brazen, open. As president, I can do anything I want. Who was the last president to essentially say that, Sam?
Nixon.
Nixon again. This seems to be a model. Nixon provoked widespread outrage when he said, if the president does it, it can't be illegal. We don't get anymore, unfortunately, this same kind of across the board bipartisan outrage. But basically, Trump is doing this in part to show everyone I can do anything I want and I'm going to do it. Go ahead and sue me. Maybe 3 years down the road, you'll stop it. But in the meantime, everything I've done is going to go through.
Right. What would you say to somebody who still supports Trump and they say, this is why I voted for him. I wanted him to reduce the size and power of the federal government. I wanted him to reduce certain financial assistance programs. This is exactly what I wanted him to do.
The polls show that's not primarily what people voted on. They voted on inflation and the border, which is a whole other question. And while probably a lot of his voters did want to reduce the size of the federal government. That's not what I pointed out here. This is not, a matter of just reducing the size of the federal government. These are
Right.
pinpoint initiatives that affect people's health and lives. And by the way, a new poll just came out today showing most of these initiatives are not supported by the American voters. They are opposed, and Donald Trump's approval ratings have been dropping over the last few days, whatever that's worth. And except for Donald Trump himself in his first term, his approval rating is right at the bottom of new presidents. New presidents usually get a big honeymoon. Bush and Obama had an over 20-point positive advantage in approval ratings. Trump is very close to being even maybe a few points ahead, but historically incredibly low. So the idea that he has this big booming mandate, which he never did, he barely eked out the popular vote uh, with smaller percentages than the percentages he lost in 2016 and 2020. Never had the kind of mandate that he's talked about.
Right. I see what you're saying.
But let me say this, you know, the American people are not fact checkers. They don't follow in detail the day-to-day workings of the government. So in a sense, you have a point, not so much on these programs, but generally on what Trump is doing. We elected him to shake things up. We think, the bureaucracy doesn't work for us, it's corrupt. And so, we did vote for Donald Trump to shake things up. So, in that generic sense, you're right. But when it comes to the particular things Donald Trump has done, to the extent people are aware of them, they don't like them.
I have to say, so far, Trump and Ramaswamy and Elon Musk created this whole boogeyman out of the federal government. And obviously, Donald Trump's been on this deep state stuff forever. So far, most of the stuff that he's done to the federal government and the federal workforce has just hurt everyday, regular Americans working for the government, middle class civil servants who had nothing to do,
Well,
obviously, with some sort of diabolical plot or anything like that. And he's just essentially all he's done is taken the bureaucracy, put his people in charge, and then fuck over the little people who work there, basically.
right. I mean, how could anyone who knew anything about Donald Trump, not just as a politician, but his entire career as a business person, how could anyone possibly believe that Donald Trump cared about the little guy? That he'd be, we had a whole session on Donald Trump, the anti-populist. He's not a populist. The populists were against the big corporations and the rich, the very people that Donald Trump is advancing and promoting. I don't understand how anyone could have thought, who knew anything about Donald Trump, that this guy was out for anyone but himself and gave two whiskers of a thought or caring about average Americans.
Right.
That's who most of the federal workforce is. Ordinary Americans who are, working to make a buck and to a great extent sacrificing because federal salaries are lower than the private sector. A lot of people in government could make more in the private sector. And one of the reasons they're in government is the security. And Trump has torpedoed that, which means, if anything, we're going to get an inferior workforce.
Yeah. It's it's pretty sad to see all this happening. But hopefully there's enough checks and balances to keep the worst of the worst from happening, right?
Well, who knows? I
Well, we don't
mean,
know, yeah, obviously, but
guardrails are being severely tested, far more so than under Nixon. Not even close. Nixon looks like a petty criminal compared to Donald Trump.
right. All right, anything else to add, Dad, before we get to the questions?
Well, we got some really controversial nominees coming up, right?
Oh yeah,
Here's
Patel.
Patel, about whom, all the news that's coming out is entirely negative. Apparently, he interfered in a very serious negative way with hostage release. He's lied about his background in law enforcement. He's come in with an enemies list. Now he's, oh, I'm really not going to do that. But, how much credence do you give to confirmation conversion, Sam?
None.
Zero. Yeah, he can say anything he wants. Then once he's in office, he can do anything he wants. Then we have RFK Jr. and I guess his sister just called him a predator, saying this guy is dangerous, a dangerous predator who is going to, wreak havoc on America's health. His own sister. And then, of course, Tulsi Gabbard, who has no intelligence experience. She's appointed to head of Office of National Intelligence, who has cozied up to some of the worst, bloodiest dictators, Vladimir Putin and Bashir Assad, who just got deposed as the head of Syria. As bad as Hegseth was, and as I said, you could search the country and be hard to find a worse Secretary of Defense. These three are worse. These three are demonstrably worse than Hegseth because a lot of the stuff about Hegseth, which I think was serious, had to do with his personal conduct. These folks.
It was not JFK's cousin. It was his daughter, actually.
Oh, was it his daughter? Thank you.
No, not his sister. His cousin. Sorry. Wait, I'm getting confused.
All right.
People are saying a lot of stuff.
I can't keep them straight. I'm sure one of our brilliant members of the audience will let us know. Any rate, the problems with these appointees, aside from anything in their private lives, which at least for Kennedy and Patel are dubious, their lack of qualifications, in fact, their negative background directly implicates the job that they are appointed to do. You've got, I'll leave aside the predator issue, but you have a dangerous, your brilliant wife says.
Not my wife. Not my wife. Your wife, my mom.
Says it was Carolyn Kennedy, his cousin. All right. I knew someone smart will straighten us out on that. But, the problems with these folks directly bear upon the job that they've been appointed to do. You got a guy appointed to head America's health programs who is a purveyor of quack science. You have someone to head the FBI who has an enemies list, who doesn't come clean about his background, who has threatened national security in various ways. And you have someone to head our intelligence operation who doesn't have the experience and seems to be favorable to some of the worst dictators around the world.
Not good.
Not good. And they may all get through. I don't think they all will.
Well, let's hope they don't, right?
So far Republicans have shown no principles, right? Remember my one sentence description of American politics?
You tell us.
Republicans have no principles, Democrats have no spine. And so far Republicans have not stood up for any principle, but just seem to be willing to bow down to whatever Donald Trump wants. And I've said this many times. Trump could disappear tomorrow and very little will change within the Republican Party because MAGA is not just Trump now, it is the Republican Party.
Right. All right. With that, we will move on to...
I want to mention one more thing.
Okay, go for it.
1 minute. He also fired about a dozen career prosecutors because they were part of Jack Smith's team that prosecuted Trump. No cause for firing them other than, they did their duty in being part of this very powerful indictment against Donald Trump. Again, it's not clear whether he had the legal authority to fire these folks. I don't know what their civil service protections was, but Trump doesn't care. Sue me later,
Right. All right. With that, we will move on to the question portion of this show. I want to do some housekeeping stuff first, Dad, if that's okay with you.
I think the housekeeping stuff is very important. It keeps us afloat.
Yes. So remember that members and donations get priority on questions. We are actually trying not to stream on Twitch, although we're having some technical difficulties. But if you search Allan Lichtman into Twitch, you should find our channel. I'm not sure if it's working right now or not, but in theory, we should be streaming on Twitch. Hopefully in the future, it'll go more smoothly. So if you like to watch Twitch, if you know other people who like Twitch, tell them, hey, Allan Lichtman's on Twitch. Catch us there. I also want to remind people that we are right after the podcast, or right after the live stream, we post the show as a podcast on Apple Podcast and Spotify. So if you like listening in the car, on the way to work, you can always listen there. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating. That's very helpful for the algorithm. If
What's the story with TikTok?
TikTok is still alive. I mean,
Are we on it?
yes, we're on TikTok as well. We're on our socials are right here, Dad. Everybody can see them. TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, all that jazz. My final thought was, we have 2,235 people watching and only 710 likes. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. That would be great for all of us. Our first question is from In Your Face.
We about almost tripled our last show, which was, because of your obligations, a late show, but we've recaptured a lot of our audience, and I greatly appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. How about I capture you, man? And then I give you a whoppa, bang,
I
pow.
might give you a 3-4.
Oh, that would be scary.
Better watch it.
Our first question is from member In Your Face New Yorker. They say, I saw this morning's memo about federal funds being frozen. It feels like this is the last move in what is becoming a dictatorship. Are there any checks and balances left? Is anybody going to do anything? I'm frightening because as an autistic woman, I benefit from DEI. And because my company is an affordable housing company, we get federal funds. What can we do? I feel so overwhelmed, hopeless, and defeated.
Yeah. First of all, your comment is right on, except for one thing. It's not the final move. There are a lot more moves, unfortunately, that are going to come. Secondly, this attack on DEI is based on an enormous falsehood, like everything else that Donald Trump is, for. Everyone wanted to see Roe versus Wade overturned. January 6th was a day of love. I can go on. But here's the big falsehood that somehow white people are being discriminated in America, which is the biggest pile of nonsense you can imagine.
Seriously.
75% of management positions in the federal government are held by whom, Sam?
I'm assuming white folk.
White people. The vast majority of members of Congress, the Senate, state legislatures, county commissions, city councils, except in minority cities, but if you look at it overall, are white. The vast majority of the CEOs and top executives of major corporations are what, Sam?
White.
White. So this myth that somehow whites are being shortchanged and being discriminated against is abject nonsense. And these DEI programs, the other big myth, they're not quota programs. There are no quotas in the federal government or in major corporations. They are designed to make sure that employment opportunities are equally open to minorities who historically have been shut out of good government and private sector jobs. Look at the 1965 Lyndon Johnson executive order that Trump overturned. It was not a quota order. It was an order to make sure that the federal government and government contractors and other Johnson executive orders would not be discriminating against minorities to perpetuate what was even more an overwhelmingly white government and white management structure in private industry. So this has nothing to do with quotas or, reverse discrimination or undermining the status of white people. It has to do with providing underrepresented, discriminated groups opportunities. Of course, Donald Trump and his allies don't admit that there's any discrimination based on race or gender, ethnicity, religion still existing in America. Of course, they have no basis for that. 99% of the academic studies, and they're cited in my new book, which will be out soon from Notre Dame Press, Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism. I go through the studies. Overwhelmingly, regardless of the ideology of the researcher, overwhelmingly, research has proven that there is still lingering discrimination in every aspect of life: education, healthcare, housing, crime.
Yeah, I think another big thing that I've heard a lot of people like Joe Rogan, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk say is, there's this attack on merit, and I don't think they
That's garbage.
right. I don't think they understand, or they're purposely lying to people that these DEI programs do not raise people who are not of merit to these positions. They just
Never.
expand the scope of their search and include people of color who are just as merit based as any white person is.
Yeah. And it's also very rich for Trump to be talking about merit when he has appointed the least meritorious cabinet, maybe in the modern history of the country.
Good point. Our next question is from Secular Monk. They say, do you know how Trump's executive order freezing spending on federal grants affects education?
Again, none of this is crystal clear
Right.
because, everything coming out of the Trump administration is very murky. But before I get to that, I want to respond to the part of the last question. What can we do?
Oh, sure.
Call your member of Congress, write your member of Congress, email to your member of Congress, write to your senators, call your senators, email them, arrange appointments, put pressure where it's possible to put pressure on officials who have to be up for election. That's the best advice I can give you right now. Now, uh,
Wait, hold on one
it will
second.
directly affect education.
One second. Seven Dogs, one of the people in the chat, said a funny joke. They said, Hegseth is a DUI hire.
Yes.
That's a good one.
And as I said, what basically Trump has done is attacked legitimate affirmative action and established affirmative action for Trump's loyalists. That seems to be the primary criterion for getting an appointment under Donald Trump. Nothing to do with independent merit.
Okay, you were
Now,
talking about education.
yeah, it directly affects education. Public schools in America, get very large amounts of funding from the federal government, particularly schools with a lot of at-risk children. Uh, Programs like school lunches, I mentioned, could be affected. Uh, Special programs for children with disabilities, special needs, coming out of impoverished backgrounds could be affected. Generally, it could undermine budgets for public schools, and they're happy about that. They don't believe in public education. And of course, it directly affects colleges and universities for whom most of their research is funded by the federal government, or at least a great deal of their research is funded by the federal government. So this, you know, puts a huge hole into K to 12 public education as well as higher education, not just public institutions of higher education, but private institutions also are very heavily dependent on federal funds. Now they say things like Pell Grants and student loans. Pell Grants, a scholarship program, student loans, other federal scholarship programs for students won't be affected. But who knows? This is just the first darn week. Who knows, how they're going to extend all of this.
Right. And again, they want to be doing this. They think their whole agenda is that education is too woke and they want to destroy it.
Look what's going on in Texas, Florida, Iowa, and other states, the wholesale attack on public education and objective, impartial, fact-based teaching.
Our first Discord question of the night. If you want to join our Discord, the link to that is in the description of this video. This is from Jaden. They said, I've seen people on both Facebook and Blue Sky say that Trump will basically try to or succeed in becoming the next Hitler. Professor Lichtman, do you think Trump/the country is moving in that direction? One of my friends doesn't believe so, but instead that this will be slightly less authoritarian version of what Russia is right now.
Yeah, I kind of believe the latter. As you know, I'm very reluctant to compare anyone to Hitler.
Yeah.
Hitler was not quite unique, but close to being unique in his evil impact on the world, almost a singular figure. So I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. Who have I more accurately compared him to?
Viktor Orban.
Viktor Orban in Hungary, who they openly embraced, Trump and his allies. And he's more of a modern authoritarian, uh, snuffing out the political opposition, uh, snuffing out the free press, governing without guardrails. I think that's where we're heading, not to Nazi Germany, although, stay vigilant. Who knows?
Our second Discord question of the night is from Barbecue Beans. They say, Professor Lichtman, do you believe Mitch McConnell ever thought Trump would make a comeback and regrets not getting the votes to convict him? I think he feels guilt and is going to spend his final 2 years as a roadblock, similar to the late, great John McCain.
God, I never would have compared Mitch McConnell, kind of the ultimate conservative Republican partisan, to the independent John McCain. But I think, this very smart audience member is onto something. I do think McConnell regrets not voting to convict Trump in the second impeachment, which would only have had the effect of stopping him from running again, because he was already out of office. And, it might have led to prosecution of him, but who knows, given the attorney general that we had. So I do think Mitch McConnell does have some regrets. And I'm not sure he's going to oppose everything, but he's certainly not going to just join the Trump bandwagon, as we saw in his casting a vote against the Hegseth confirmation. I wonder, though, and I have no evidence for this, but, my suspicious antenna has been vibrating. Was this just a setup that McConnell knew he was going to be confirmed anyway? And so he could, be this, kind of principled hero casting a vote against him, even
Right.
though he knew it wouldn't matter.
That's a fair point. I didn't think about that. Next question. Who do you think Trump listens to when he comes up with these decisions?
It's a very good question. I think this guy, Russell Vought, who's one who wants to put as head of OMB, is someone he listens to. Susan Wiles, his chief of staff. Elon Musk, his big donor, who you've heard my analysis of that, was essentially responsible for Trump's election. Without Musk, I do not believe Trump would have been elected. Disinformation alone about abortion, which totally diffused the abortion issue, was enough, more than enough, to turn the election to Trump. But it's hard to know exactly who, if anyone, he listens to, rather than following his own whims.
He has to be listening to somebody. No, there's no shot he's doing all this work on his own.
No,
I
I've
don't.
suggested a few.
Yeah. Dustin with a $10 donation. They say, can you speak on Section 6B of Trump's immigration executive order? It mentions invoking the Insurrection Act. Is that martial law? What checks exist against this?
There are very little checks that exist with respect to the invoking of the Insurrection Act. It pretty much is equivalent to martial law. That is, if you invoke the Insurrection Act, you can override another act. Remember, we talked about this before. Do you remember what that act was about using military for domestic enforcement purposes?
I don't
The
remember.
Posse Comitatus Act from the 19th century. If you invoke the Insurrection Act, you can then use the military for domestic law enforcement, including the detention and deportation of immigrants.
Jeff V with the $5 donation. They say if the criminals that Donald Trump has pardoned commit more crimes, does presidential immunity granted by the Supreme Court protect him against civil lawsuits?
I'm not sure who you're talking about,
Right.
Trump or
Or
the
the,
insurrection.
yeah.
The insurrectionists are not protected in any way. If they commit future crimes, they can be prosecuted criminally, they can be sued civilly. Trump is being sued, even though he's the sitting president, civilly for January 6th and some other issues. And he has just petitioned the court to grant him immunity from civil suits in state court. The Supreme Court in the Clinton case had said a president does not have immunity from civil suits in federal court, but Trump is arguing that a president should have immunity, particularly him. He's uniquely subject to these civil suits. Never seen anything like that, even under Nixon or Clinton. And he's arguing that he should have absolute immunity as president from civil suits brought in state court. That's going to be a long process of litigation that will probably also go back to the Supreme Court. But so far, the courts have let the civil cases proceed.
Right. Can you talk about the history of the immigration deportations? Many of my former students are immigration lawyers, and I'm hearing shocking stories that started with Obama, escalated with Trump, and continued with Biden. I was shocked because I thought the two of them were good guys. I guess she's meaning Obama and Biden.
Yeah, there's a long history of the deportation of immigrants going all the way back to the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, which authorized, under pretty broad conditions, the deportation of immigrants. And deportation has been a policy pursued by both Republicans and Democrats, primarily against immigrants who've committed, undocumented immigrants who've committed serious crime. And the audience member is absolutely right. This has not been limited to Republican presidents, not just Operation Wetback under Eisenhower. It's been very evident under Biden and Obama. What's different, though, is there has never been an effort for the mass deportation of, essentially all undocumented immigrants. They're talking about first targeting those who committed crimes, but then going on to broadly target undocumented immigrants, no matter how long they've been here, no matter how integrated they are in the community, no matter how much taxes they pay, no matter how many jobs they create or jobs they perform. That's what's new and different. And already, as I predicted, remember, Sam, they have swept up U.S. citizens and swept up large numbers of undocumented immigrants who don't have a serious crime record, don't have a felony conviction of any kind.
Right. We have about 6 questions about Greg Palast, investigative reporter who is claiming voter purge and voter suppression. He estimates Kamala Harris lost 3.5 million votes due to purging and would have won PA, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia. Have you checked this out, Dad, yet? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I haven't had a chance. I've been working on these other things to check it out. I think there's a case to be made in Georgia. I'm much more dubious about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, which Biden won in 2020, and I'm not aware, and I could be wrong. I haven't studied it, but I'm not aware of major changes in the laws regarding elections in those three states. Plus, Trump made his biggest gains, not in the swing states, but where?
In blue states, I guess?
New York and California. He
Right.
deeply cut into Democratic majorities there. That's why he won the popular vote. And certainly, New York and California were not engaging in voter suppression. So, I'm skeptical, but I'm, willing to give it a study.
Yeah, you should check it out. You should read it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next
I'm
question.
also skeptical because the major voting rights groups like the Lawyers Committee or the LDF have not picked up on this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You would think if it's got real validity, it would be picked up by these groups that have been fighting voter suppression for decades.
Yeah.
I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying I'm skeptical.
Right. I get that. Sean Matthews says, "How do you think Larry Hogan's bipartisan leadership style as governor of Maryland impacted both the state's political climate and his national reputation, especially in the context of increasing political polarization in the U.S.?"
It's basically made him a pariah within the Republican Party, even though it's made him popular as a governor within Maryland. It's the only way you can be elected as a Republican governor would be, through you can't be a MAGA in Maryland. Plus, it doesn't help him in Maryland, as we saw, when it comes to a senatorial, a national election. Maryland has elected in the last 20 years a couple of Republican governors, Hogan and before him Bob Ehrlich, but no Republican senators and basically only one Republican member of Congress.
Did Lee Atwater take down Gary Hart in 1988 via the monkey business scandal? I'm gonna be honest with you,
That's,
Dad. I don't know what any of those words meant.
just think about this. Donald Trump has been civilly found to be a sexual assaulter. I'm not going to say rape because that got Stephanopoulos into trouble, but he certainly was found guilty of sexual abuse, sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, even though technically it wasn't rape under New York state law, and he got huge judgments against him for then defaming her. I don't know how many women, but north of 20 women have accused him of sexual harassment and abuse. Uh, he openly bragged in the Access Hollywood tape about sexually assaulting women, saying, because you're a star, you can just grasp them by their private parts. And in another part of that Access Hollywood tape that no one talks about, he also talks about while he was married, pursuing a married woman to try to have sex with her. He failed, but can you imagine that? Gary Hart was seen on this boat, the monkey business, with a woman who wasn't his wife, with whom he may or may not have been having an affair, and boom, that knocked the front runner out of contention. A tiny sliver, a tiny fraction of what has been uh, the sex scandals surrounding Donald Trump, which don't seem to have hurt him at all. And the most remarkable part of this is who's his base among religions?
Evangelicals.
Evangelical Christians who are supposed to be the guardians of personal morality, who raged an outrage against Bill Clinton because he had a consensual affair with a White House intern.
Morality only lives along party lines in this day and age,
Unfortunately,
unfortunately.
that's one of the saddest developments of contemporary politics. These evangelical Christians have become just another interest group, having no moral standing, no different from the Chamber of Commerce or the NRA or the unions, just another interest group pursuing their version of policies for the country.
Right. This question is, why does Trump have the authority to impose tariffs and not Congress? Can Congress take back this power?
Of course, Congress could, Trump may not recognize it, but under the laws, Congress has given the president broad latitude, not just Trump, but other presidents as well, to set tariff rates. So again, I'm not a lawyer. I always say that, but I have studied these things. I don't think it's illegal for Trump through executive action to impose tariffs. It may be highly undesirable and it's going to increase prices and put a burden on the very people who voted for him to bring prices down. But I don't think, unlike a lot of these other actions, it is in fact illegal.
Our next question is about Trump's digital meme coin pump and dump. Did you follow this at all, Dad? He
Not really, a little bit.
he
He
is
created this coin out of nowhere, and he's made billions of dollars from his supporters buying it. Just
yeah.
like, his Truth Social, which was worth nothing,
It's
but all
essentially
the supporters poured this money into it.
it's essentially like a Bitcoin copycat. So, and this is something that's pretty common. A lot of like YouTubers and digital media influencers often do this. They create this digital coin, they promote it, they get all their followers to buy it, and then they pull out of it. And then so they take all that money and then the coin crashes. So everybody who invested in it loses all their money and they run away with lots of money. And it's weird
Hey,
because
can we do this?
no, don't say that. This is a
I know.
terrible thing. This is a terrible thing.
Here's the point.
Wait, hold on.
You
Let me
know,
finish. Let me finish. The thing I don't understand is that YouTubers and Instagram influencers get like dragged through the mug when they do these pump and dump coins. But somehow the president of the United States does it and he just goes on his merry way. I don't get it.
I don't get it either. And I've talked about this before. These, middle class, working class people, you know, are giving one or the other of Donald Trump's schemes 50, 100, $200, and then screaming that they can't afford to buy eggs. I don't get it. It just baffles me.
There's still a lot of things I don't get about this election, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe Ballast is right, although again, I am very skeptical.
yeah. All
All
right.
right, it's after 10.
Let's do one more question.
Two more.
Wow,
I'm feeling pumped
okay.
up.
This is from Krajimir Boyanov. They say, Professor, have you thought about helping start a peaceful resistance movement against Trumpism and authoritarianism, etc.? I believe thousands will follow you if you do so.
Well, I think I'm kind of doing that.
Right, with the show.
Our channel and my posts. I'm not a political organizer. That's not my strength. I'm not a politician. That's not my strength. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to lead a movement, but I do have a lot of followers. So you're making a point there, but that's not my strength. My strength is what I'm doing right here.
Right. Axel Moreno says, slightly off topic, but next year will be the 5th anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. Do you ever ponder about how it's going to be covered, if at all, in schools?
Depends where you are. In the red states, it either won't be covered or it'll be covered from a Trumpian point of view. As a bunch of patriots who legitimately believe the election was stolen, who were provoked into violence by the police. I think in a lot of states, that's how it's going to be covered. I think, in some of the swing states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and blue states, it'll be covered more objectively.
Right. Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this day, January 28th, 2025. The good news is, if you want to keep hanging out, the Lichtman Live post show is on my channel. The link to that is linked in the chat. Let's see, what else did I have to say? I think that's it. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
It's so easy to be overwhelmed. That's part of Trump's strategy. It's so easy just to give up and throw up your hands because it's so hard to follow what he's doing and so hard to figure out how to oppose it. But as I said, there are ways to resist. And right now, I think the most important form of resistance is putting the pressure on elected officials through emails, letters, phone calls, visits.
Right. All right. I want to, obviously, we can't get to every donation question, so I want to give some shout outs to people who donated. Shout out to Tom, Maria Carini, Be Like Water, Private CM, Jim S., Sharon Novak, SL, CD, Derek Taylor, CA, Bruce Fast Driver, Irma Lee, Michael Hill, Jason Arnaud, and Jenna K. Thank you for your donations. All right, folks. Lichtman Live post show is up right after this on my channel. Say goodnight to the people, Dad.
Good night, and thank you for returning to the show. We're going to keep it up as long as I have the strength and stamina, and I think that'll be a very long time. And wish me luck in the Senior Olympics. I'll keep you posted on that.
Good luck.
Thanks.